All right, welcome listeners and viewers to season 7 of Dudes of the Dead podcast. We are back after a very brief hiatus for Christmas holidays and New Year's, and we are here to bring you 1980s horror. So I think Leatherface has a few things he wants to say about some qualifications that we've decided upon for this season.
Indeed. So welcome back to season 7. So as we were preparing for season 7 and we're doing all 80s stuff, I had some ideas, and Mike and I have discussed this about we are not going to be covering the following films, even though they're bangers, even though they're great 80s films. We've covered them in some way, shape, or form in past episodes. So The Thing, John Carpenter, we will not be doing. The Shining, Alien, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Lost Boys. All of those in some way, shape, or form we've talked about, we've covered, we've given you our thoughts. They're great films, but we thought we'd focus on some other things because there were so many things.
Yeah, so most of those films you can go check our back catalog on Spotify, on YouTube, on Anchor, on Apple Podcasts, and we have reviews already of most of those. The Shining, I think we feel like has just been reviewed to death by everybody. We probably don't have a whole lot to add to that conversation.
No.
Maybe one day we'll do it, but not as part of this season. We're looking for more 80s deep cuts maybe.
Exactly.
And some other ones. So good. So yeah, I thought we would start just with a brief, our background with 1980s horror. And I think you and I have very different backgrounds.
Very different.
So I was born in 1983. I've mentioned this before. So, you know, in my early days in elementary school, I wasn't watching a whole lot of horror films. So for me, I would say the 80s is my biggest blind spot in horror. I've made some efforts to go back and watch many of the classics, doing these franchise reviews. Watched the Halloween franchise, the Friday the 13th franchise. I'm partway through the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Watched a few classics like Toxic Avenger and Chopping Mall. So I have been trying to go back, but for sure, my biggest blind spot is 80s horror. So it was pretty exciting looking at possible films to cover this season. And most of them I haven't seen. But I think you have obviously a slightly different relationship with 80s horror.
Yeah, I mean, so just to put it in perspective, I was in grade 11 in 1983. And so, of course, for those of you who don't know, Blockbuster was still a thing. Plus, we had like little local video stores. So Friday nights, you know, the boys would go out and I was always gravitating to the horror section. And although I did see a lot of the big ones and some of the schlockier ones, there are some that I haven't seen that I've gone back and watched too. Slumber Party Massacre comes to mind. So there are things that I missed either because for some reason it didn't appeal to me. You know, in those days, we'd look at the cover and say, yeah, that looks good. So it wouldn't be, oh, that's my favorite director, or I like that star. I was like, oh, that cover looks gruesome. Let's watch that one tonight. So
yeah, it's funny you mention that because I think my relationship with 80s horror is mostly being a kid in the video store and seeing the covers and being like, oh, I would love to watch that. And then I'd ask my mom and they'd slap me, make me put it back and rent Home Alone or something. So I would admit though, I was very compelled to go back and watch a lot of like the 70s horror. Like I really wanted to watch The Exorcist. I'd heard lots about Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Rosemary's Baby. Like those all had good reputations. I would admit I kind of looked down on 80s horror though. Like I really was a fan of like orchestral soundtracks as a kid. Like I loved like Braveheart or Indiana Jones or like things that had good, strong orchestral soundtracks. And when I would watch some of these 80s horror films, the synth,
terrible.
It wasn't my jam. I've grown to appreciate it more over time. But at that point, I almost just was turned off by the synth soundtracks.
And I have some thoughts on today's movie and the soundtrack.
Right. So like some of those, and I really associated with just like all the Freddy films and all the Jason films and all the Michael Myers films. And I wasn't super interested in slashers. Like that wasn't what appealed to me. So it's pretty, I'm looking forward to going back and diving into some of these 80s films because for a long time it was not a priority for me until I really got into horror. So
yeah, especially when you when you yourself perceive that you have a gap somewhere in the history of horror. Like for me, it was sort of black and white films, Cat People, 1942, some of the silent films. I hadn't seen any of those. So in the last decade, maybe I've, picked away at some of those earlier movies. And the funny thing is, for me anyway, I'm a fan of black and white film and older film. And some of those films still stand up. I mean, because they don't rely on practical effects.
That's right.
They rely on atmosphere or suggestion because they just couldn't do what they wanted to do.
Because we reviewed Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the first one. So that was pretty cool to go back and experience. And Nosferatu, the original one we watched.
And even The Thing from Another Planet, which The Thing was based on.
Yeah, I watched that in film studies in university. I really liked it.
Yeah.
It kind of has the essence of.
I mean, it's different, obviously. Yeah, but it's it's interesting when you perceive that you have a gap and then you go back and fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And it's there's a couple of films that I haven't seen that we're thinking about doing, and there's some films that I haven't seen in a long, long time. So I'm looking forward to going back and watching those.
Cool. So yeah, that'll bring me to our film for today. We did not have quick cuts today because we knew we wanted to spend a bit of time talking about just our relationship to 1980s horror. But we are going with a director who's sort of synonymous with 80s horror, and this is the Godfather himself, John Carpenter. And I was looking at, when I knew we were going to do this 80s season, I was just looking at top 80s horror lists, and this one kept coming up again and again. So I figured, I've not seen it. It seems to be well regarded, and it's by John Carpenter, and that is The Prince of Darkness from 1987. So the synopsis is Prince of Darkness is a 1987 supernatural horror film directed by John Carpenter. The story follows a group of quantum physics students and scientists who, alongside a Catholic priest, investigate a mysterious cylinder containing a green liquid found in an abandoned Los Angeles church. They discover that the liquid is a sentient embodiment of Satan, leading to terrifying consequences. It begins to possess members of the group. This is starring Donald Pleasance as the priest and Victor Wong as Professor Howard Barak. And I recognize him from the Three Ninjas movies. Did you ever watch those?
No.
With like the kids, and he's like the grandpa who trains them.
No.
So I was like, oh yeah, it's Grandpa from Three Ninjas. I loved him. This has a 6.7 on Internet Movie Database, and a not so great critic score on Rotten Tomatoes of 58%. And a slightly better audience score of 63%. And this film is the second installment in what Carpenter refers to as his Apocalypse trilogy, which also includes The Thing from 1982 and In the Mouth of Madness 1994. So you'd seen this one before, I believe, and
Yes.
I had not. Do you remember the context in which you first watched Prince of Darkness?
That's a good question. No, to be fair.
No.
I have no idea.
So you don't know if you saw this in theaters?
Oh,
or...
for 100% no.
No.
I wouldn't have seen this in theaters. I would have, because 87, I was already at university
Right.
in Victoria, and it didn't get all the big movies.
Like I was in kindergarten when I think we saw this at a field trip or something.
Probably.
Yeah, the teacher took us
Yeah.
to Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
This is great. Okay, so you don't remember, do you remember what your impression was when we chose this before you rewatched it?
Yeah, I actually had positive memories of just watching it and, thinking some of the concepts were cool and whatever. And I still feel some of that, but I came away more critically this time.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to jump into this. I mean, it's funny watching it, like within the first 5 shots, like, we're in the 80s. Like there was, in the first 3 shots, I think there was mullets, pink pants, jean jackets. Like, oh yeah, this feels very 80s, bad mustaches.
Very 80s.
And then, yeah, it's an interesting premise. So again, we will start with non-spoiler and we'll jump into spoilers later. So it was interesting. I guess Carpenter said he was getting tired of doing big budget kind of studio films. And so he wanted to do an independent film. This had a budget of $3 million. And he said he had read a book on quantum mechanics and subatomic particles. And that was like one of his inspirations for making this movie. And so it's an interesting blend of mixing kind of religious horror with science.
Yeah.
And so you have the physics professor and the priest, Donald Pleasance, who are working together to investigate this odd cylinder of satanic goo. Yeah, I'll admit, I was mixed. It's going to be interesting this season, I think, just having encountering these films at an earlier age where maybe it had a bigger influence on you and was more nostalgic, where for me, it's coming at it many years later. So I don't have that nostalgia that I think a lot of people will have for these films. Yes. Interesting that it starred Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
As the leader of what would you call them? Cultists or?
I guess. Yeah. I mean, it's a band of street people that seem to be controlled somehow by this substance.
Yeah. Were you an Alice Cooper fan?
No, but I have a lot of respect for Alice Cooper, having seen interviews with him and stuff. And apparently he's a rabid golfer, which belies his stage presence. But he's a very straight-laced guy.
Yeah.
He just loves the theater of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And he came into it in the 70s when, you know, a lot of that glam rock and theatrical rock was in its heyday, and he certainly took advantage of that. So, yeah, I mean, he certainly is menacing as a character.
Mm-hmm. That's the first time I've ever seen a unicycle kill in a horror movie. I think. Spoilers. I mean, not really, but
yeah,
that was interesting. So, yeah, I'll admit I appreciate that they were doing something unique, trying to blend the religious with the scientific.
Yeah.
But I found a lot of the lingo and a lot of what they were saying at the end of the day didn't actually make a ton of sense.
100%.
So I was kind of like, okay, like this maybe makes sense, but didn't really draw me in. I appreciated that it was something different.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It didn't, it just ended up kind of going over my head and didn't work for me so much.
I mean, quantum physics, I think, and I'm not a physicist, but I'm pretty sure I have a general concept that it's a pretty difficult thing to like just kind of skim over in a movie with all these other things going on.
And it's probably really not meant to mix with religion. So when you try to tie in like the devil and Jesus and how that's related to parallel universes and quantum physics, it just, in my mind, kind of fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, so that's my feeling too. Like the concept is cool. If we take the concept, what if science could prove the existence of the devil? Mm-hmm. But they don't pull it off. And for a group of supposedly PhDs and PhD candidates, there's a lot of, or there's little common sense.
Yes.
In the cast. And I'll talk a little bit, like there's some things also that didn't date very well.
No.
So, you know, it's, and I've said this before. I mean, I say that knowing that I've said this before, which is we can't judge the past with modern eyes. I mean, we can say, okay, well, that doesn't really hold true anymore, or that didn't date very well, but I'm not blaming it is what it is. It was the time, but there's lots of things like, Jameson Parker, who you didn't mention, was in, I'm just trying to remember the television series. It was him.
Was that Mustache Boy?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was in like a Hardy Boys kind of thing, but it was two brothers,
okay,
like a detective series.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I mean, his initial meeting with the woman that he's infatuated with, he says some really off base things. And instead of her just getting up and leaving, he goes, "Oh, no, sorry, I was just joking." It's like, okay, well, that's not but then they jump into bed together.
Yeah.
So that part too doesn't date very well for me. But I see that as a trend in Carpenter films. Like if you watch Carpenter films, maybe except for The Thing.
The Thing, yeah.
But a lot of them, there's a lot of bed hopping.
Yeah.
And maybe if I was married to Adrienne Barbeau, I would envision that as well. I don't know. But yeah, I don't think they delivered on the promise. I think it started well and there was great atmosphere. And then once they got into the church, it started to disintegrate for me.
Oh, that's interesting, because I think I was the opposite. I really didn't like the first half of the film, but then I started to find I appreciated more elements in the second half. So we're maybe the opposite. I was really like, I think this is one of the most boring lead characters in a film that I've ever seen. Like the main guy is so uninspiring to me. He's uncharismatic. He's uninteresting.
No, which one are you talking about? The main guys
with the mustache,
Jameson Parker. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. None of the characters.
No, the characters are pretty terrible across the board. And even like Donald Pleasance, he's there. He's fine. But he doesn't really offer a whole lot. His character actually doesn't even do a whole lot. Like for me, it was the only one with any kind of interest or charisma for me was the physics professor.
Right.
What was the name again? Victor Wong. I thought he was the highlight in terms of performances. I mean, everyone else was pretty lame and forgettable. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know about this film in particular, but I've heard stories about Donald Pleasance, who enjoyed a glass of wine or 50. Yeah. And I wondered, because I know in Halloween, not only was the drinking was an issue, but they only had him for like 2 days or 3 days or something. So all those scenes had to be filmed.
I remember you saying that before. Yeah.
So I wondered in this one, which is almost a decade later, like 8 years later, I wonder if they only had him for a certain, like he just phones it in.
Yeah.
And it's just typical. You could have exchanged Dr. Loomis from Halloween and this priest.
Well, that's interesting because I don't think I've seen Donald Pleasance in a whole lot of things, and you kind of hear about the guy, but I've seen him in Halloween, I've seen him in this, and I've been kind of underwhelmed across the board. He's fine, but I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, Donald Pleasance, he's amazing.
I can't remember the name of it now. It's on my list of things to watch. There's apparently one in the 60s with Donald Pleasance that's pretty out there. I think it's a survival horror kind of thing.
Oh, cool.
And there's also an Aussie film. And again, I can't remember the title of it. Donald Pleasance is really good in that one.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that he's good, but I've just not really seen it.
I think this is towards the end of his career, and I do think that his
Just doing the
collaborations,
paycheck,
with Carpenter in particular, I think he has a mood, he has a way of delivering lines that maybe worked for Carpenter, but yeah, I just felt like he was phoning it in. It wasn't.
Yeah, there's that one when the guy's like, this is caca. You guys are caca. It's like, what?
Yeah.
And then there's the scene where that one guy is trapped in the room and he's kind of like screaming, like, get me out of here. And it's just so cheesy and bad.
That guy in particular, his character is ridiculous.
Terrible.
I mean, yeah, and there's like a lot of fake bravado with him and stuff. And then when he actually, when brass tacks, happens, he's like, get me out of here.
Yeah.
It was just, the characters in many instances weren't believable and they weren't developed.
Exactly. So like there's some mood and tone things that I thought were cool. Like some of the shots of the sky where they show like the moon and the sun close together, and like the creepy visual of the people, the cultists just kind of standing around the church. Like there was neat things. And I thought by the end, there was one scene where there's a woman typing on a computer, like staring off. Like that was kind of unsettling. And I thought, so it has good elements, but with terrible characters, the religion science mesh, which didn't work for me. And I don't know. It was just a bit awkward.
And can we talk about the synth score now in this?
Sure, yeah.
Because I didn't remember the soundtrack in this one being so overpowering. I found it super distracting. And it wasn't like, I love the Halloween theme. And when I went to university, I even got a piano player to teach me how to play it. This one just aggravated me to know, because it was too loud, in my opinion. It needed to come down. And I mean, Carpenter, I know, is a musician, and I know that he scores a lot of his own music and stuff, and that's great. This one seemed, I don't know if he was enamored with this one and thought, wow, this is a really great one. I'm just going to crank this baby. But it doesn't, to me, it detracts from the film. It doesn't add to the film, which is what I think music should do.
Yeah, I maybe disagree with you. I mean, I see what you're saying, because I think it's always there. Like, I think every scene, like, it doesn't ever stop. So whereas like the original Halloween theme is used to accent particular moments for effect, and this, because every scene has it, but I did almost feel a bit of that cadence, a bit of that tension building, like, because it is a bit unsettling and it's always there. It did kind of work for me. Like, I noticed it, but in a way, I think it felt it drew me in, but I could see how someone would have the opposite effect.
Yeah, it's almost like a drone effect, which I totally get. That it has, it's kind of like when you, and I'm just trying to think of a film that we've seen that we've talked about with this. You've got like that really
like
subtle heartbeat sound.
Oh yeah.
Or something like that.
Boom, boom, like the thing. Boom, boom.
Yes.
Like, yeah.
And that's exactly the one I was thinking of. Thank you.
He actually borrowed from that a little. He did a bit of that too in this one, I think.
Yeah.
That, like, boom, boom.
But it wasn't subtle, which is what bugged me.
No. But because it bugged you, do you think that was the intended effect? Like, to kind of make the audience feel off?
Well, maybe. I mean, if he was trying to piss me off, it worked. But I mean, if he was just trying to set me on edge, I think he could have brought the volume down a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting that because I anticipated we'd be in agreement on that, but I can see how for some people that the soundtrack might work. But
do you have music on all the time? like when you're at home?
No.
See, I always have music. Like if I'm doing anything around the house, I have that type of music on in the background. And I remember once playing it for you and you're like, this is annoying. Like turn this off. And I wonder if that's part of it. Like I like having that sort of like synthy background cadence when I'm doing things. But if I know other people hate it. So I wonder if that's part of it. Like if I'm used to that persistent background noise,
maybe,
it almost like just adds to the mood and adds to the atmosphere. But if you weren't used to it, it might be annoying. Like there's too much stimulus.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point because for me, when I listen to music, I listen specifically because I want to hear that music.
Yeah.
Or I'm learning a song on guitar and I'm listening to the different parts or whatever. My background stuff is podcasts. I'll have it on in the background. But music,
podcasts are lame, don't you think?
Yeah.
I don't really like podcasts. Just kidding.
Yeah, music in the background, I don't, I mean, it's not to say that I don't, if you've got some soft jazz in the background when you're at a restaurant, like that's great for mood music, but it's barely noticeable. This one was like for me, it was in my face all the time. And if it was done for an effect, okay, I can see that. But for me, it was just aggravating.
Yeah, so I think we both definitely noticed it. It's just for you, it was more of a negative. For me, it was more of a positive. But I did read some reviews, I think, where people did complain about the persistence of the music.
Yeah, it was interesting because I went through and tried to look up some reviews today, and a lot of mixed reviews, like a lot of 4.5 stars out of 5.
Wow.
And then some 1s. I mean, and everybody's got their own taste, but even critical reviews. Like I went back and reread the Roger Ebert review from 1987, and he was pretty positive. I mean, he did talk about the characters being underdeveloped and whatever, but I think just seeing if I have this isn't Roger Ebert. I'll read this quote in a second, but Ebert was saying this was Carpenter's return to the horror genre or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, he is doing something unique and there's good elements to it. As a zombie fan, I kind of like the second half because it actually sort of started to feel like a zombie film. They're not quite like zombies, but they're pretty close. Yeah. Like they're not undead, but they act like it.
Yes.
And so I found that kind of compelling. Like the second half, I was definitely more into. Some of the practical effects I was pretty impressed with in the second half.
Yeah, the
Kelly. We won't. Yeah, I don't want to get into spoilers too much.
Yeah, no spoilers.
But I mostly found the first half either boring. It was mainly occupied with uninteresting characters, and there was a lot of the technical, religious, quantum physics lingo that for me just didn't really work. But I felt like once we got into like the action, I also thought the giant green vial to me just looked cheesy. I didn't think it was impressive or scary, or maybe at the time it would have been. Like that's something that maybe didn't age with time was the look. But what did you think of that?
Yeah, it just kind of looks like slime. You know that toy that you can get that gets stuck in carpets, that green goo. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it aged very well. And I the one of the concepts that I struggled with in the film is like, okay, you've got this church in Los Angeles that somehow has this 2,000-year-old relic that's been in secret with the Brotherhood of Sleep.
With the biggest, most unsubtle key you can imagine in this ornate box.
For 2,000 years. It's not going to be at the Vatican. It's not going to be in the Carpathian Mountains or, you know what I mean? Like, really? 2,000 years ago, they brought it. I mean, they didn't say that in the film, but I found that really hard to believe. And I just, the other thing coming back to the idea of.
Well, and if this room is locked off for how long? Yeah. That's like 1,000 lit candles.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
I thought that too. It's
who lit these candles?
That priest was supposed to be living there by himself. It's like, it would take you all day just to light the damn candles, right?
Oh yeah. You need to go up like giant scaffolds and
I mean, so one of the things that I wrote down for myself was, because I'm a Carpenter fanboy and I do like the other two elements, of his trilogy. The Thing, of course, is outstanding. And I like In the Mouth of Madness better than this one.
See, I've not seen that one.
But I found this to be all over the map. Like it doesn't land on anything. There's possession, theology, physics. It's like pick something and stick with it. Now, having said that, if the story were better and the characters were better, maybe they could have pulled it off.
Yeah.
But it didn't work for me.
Because you and I both like religious horror.
Yeah.
But I find the religious horror is like, it's below the surface and it's implied, and there's something there, like Reagan's playing with the Ouija board, and you're like, okay, that's when you have a giant swirling canister of green goo, like that just totally takes away from any like mystery or like it undercuts the effectiveness of what religious horror is supposed to deliver. And I'm just like, it didn't jive for me, those two genres.
No, and the one quote that I found that really, I think, sums up kind of how I feel about the film. And I'm sorry, I didn't note the critic on this, but Prince of Darkness has a handful of chillingly clever ideas, but they aren't enough to put John Carpenter's return to horror at the same level as his classic earlier outings.
Oh, is that ChatGPT or?
Yeah, exactly. Chatterbait. Yeah, I just think, when you look at The Fog, The Thing, Halloween, those are, in my mind, solid, good horror films. And he does something different with each of those. Yeah, this one, there's an element missing for me that there's no glue that holds the story together for me.
I was a bit shocked because I think it's Letterboxd. You can go to the film, you see all the reviews. Yeah. It was like 5 stars, 5 stars, 4.5 stars, 5 stars. I'm like, really? And I wonder how much of that is like nostalgia. Like if you were to rate this film before you rewatched it, it sounded like you had a more fond memory of it.
Yeah.
And for it to make all of those lists. But yeah, on rewatch, there's a lot of issues.
I was actually looking forward. I don't know how long, but it's been many years since I've seen this. And I was looking forward to watching it because I had in my mind a positive memory of watching this film. And, maybe it's life experience and, the year 2025 or whatever, but there were certainly some cringy lines and some cringy interactions with characters that it's like, man, how did they possibly get away with that?
Yeah.
But again, right, different time and different expectations. And in most of Carpenter's films, there's some cringy stuff going on.
Sure, yeah. It was interesting, some of the time capsule elements, though.
Yeah.
Like even one of the first shots is, I think it's at the church next door. It's like a photo development place, which doesn't even exist anymore. But like when you used to like go and take your photos in and wait for 3 hours and open the envelope and look through your pictures.
So, yeah, okay, we talked about the score, the characters. The final act kind of goes off the rails for me. I mean, in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
It's a little bit batshit. Like there's so much going on.
Should we just give our thoughts and then jump into some spoilers?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay. So do you recommend modern audiences go back and check out Prince of Darkness?
No. I do not.
I sadly have to agree. There's some good stuff here, but yeah, if you were 18 right now, would you enjoy going back and watching Prince of Darkness? Probably not. From this trilogy, definitely I would recommend The Thing over
100%.
this. I've not seen The Mouth of Madness. Is that one you would recommend?
Well, again, it's been many years and I would have to go back and rewatch. I remember Sam Neill's performance being quite good in that one.
Is that a Lovecraftian one?
Yeah, sort of.
Because this even had a bit of that vibe. Like you've got these
cosmic,
cultists like summoning this kind of elder god. In this case, it's based in religion.
Yeah.
But to me, it had a Lovecraftian feel to it.
That's a good call.
And that mix of science, not the religion so much, but yeah, this felt like a Lovecraft kind of homage a bit.
I seem to recall that In the Mouth of Madness has that element in it. I mean, certainly I would have absolutely no hesitation recommending The Thing. And I would say as a casual moviegoer, yeah, this is not, there's not enough redeeming elements in this to make it worth watching. But if you like Carpenter stuff and you've seen The Thing, Halloween, The Fog, then okay. We've talked about this before. If you're a completionist or you like that
if you're
director,
a Carpenter completionist,
yeah, then certainly. But I'd put it low on your list. Like if you haven't seen many Carpenter films, there's many others that are more worth watching than this.
So as a general recommendation for a horror fan, I would say pass.
Yeah.
Okay. Spoilers.
Spoilers.
So I just had an upcoming thing spoiled for me.
So there's not a whole lot to spoil, really.
No, I mean,
But
other than the goo kind of possesses people.
yeah.
And okay, what's your take on the upside down shots with the goo flowing up? Like what was that supposed to be? Is that just like a different dimension thing?
Yeah, it was kind of nonsensical. Maybe there's something in quantum mechanics.
I don't know.
But even like the goose shooting out into her mouth
Yeah.
and then she's shooting into other people's mouths, like it seemed a bit of like an Exorcist
Yeah.
rip off. It didn't really work for me. It didn't really make sense.
No, and that's so coming back to what I said early on, you know, you've got these PhD candidates and professors who, whether they believe or not, some of them don't, they think it's BS. They at least understand that they're dealing with something that is kind of off the charts. It's otherworldly. And yet they wander around on their own.
Yeah.
You know, like typical horror movie, bad decision making, right?
Yeah. Like once they were possessed in some cases, I thought they were kind of unsettling.
Yep.
Like the one girl, the way she kind of
Exactly.
walked with her like wide eyes.
Yeah.
Like kind of walk up to people. And I thought that was effective. And them just standing around. Like there were parts where I thought, oh yeah, that's kind of chilling. That's kind of eerie. And the girl on the computer, like staring off, typing the same thing over and over again. Like there were moments that kind of worked.
You know,
but then as soon as there was something that worked, there'd be something that was really cheesy that threw me off again.
I mean, this one of the scenes that I actually quite liked was, and I don't remember the character's name, but the one who he's a non-believer.
Yeah.
And he goes out into the parking lot or whatever, and the cult.
The Beatles.
Yeah.
The Kaka guy.
Yeah. And when
Yeah.
the he kind of dissolves into Beatles.
That looked cool.
Yeah, I thought that was, kind of a cool scene.
Yeah. And she's standing up there and there's like beetles crawling
Yes.
around her. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, partly because
Bugs are creepy.
yeah, bugs are creepy. And it's just like, well, that gives me the willies. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Is it Kelly? I think the practical effects on her when her flesh is like melted.
right.
Like that looked pretty gross. I thought, oh yeah, that's kind of unsettling. And then she's standing by the mirror
Yes.
and Donald Pleasance like chops her head off and then she like picks it up and puts it back on. Like that was all kind of cool. And just the nature of the creatures kind of feeling like zombies. The guy like
Yep.
stabs himself in the throat and he's walking around with.
I mean, so coming back to that scene, because this is a thing that irked me
Yeah.
in the movie with Donald Pleasance. So he grabs what looks like a brand new fire axe in this church.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to break the mirror because she seems to be transfixed by the mirror. Nope. He just hides behind something, holding the axe, and somebody else breaks the mirror later. It's like, yeah.
Oh, did he not break it? I feel like maybe he threw the axe at the end, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it was another character who threw the
Okay.
axe.
Yeah. What a
at the-
moron.
and then Jameson Parker's character's like, oh, boo-hoo, the woman I slept with once is gone in a different dimension forever.
Her like sacrificing herself to push through the mirror thing kind of worked for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, that
I thought,
worked for
oh,
me.
Yeah, all right, good
Yep.
job. But yeah, the connection between those two was just awful.
Now, what did you make of the very ending when he wakes up and he's looking in the mirror? And what do you feel that Carpenter is suggesting with that? Because he's reaching out with his hand to the mirror.
Yeah, I just didn't care so much at that
Yeah,
point. I
fair.
was like, I didn't even put in the effort to try and figure it out. Like, definitely my impression when it was over was like, that was kind of whatever.
Yeah.
And the whole, I think early on in the film, I kind of gave up on trying to figure out what, it just seemed ridiculous to me. All the quantum
Exactly.
physics, religion thing just didn't work for me. So I'm like, I didn't put much effort into trying to interpret it. But did you have a interpretation?
No, well, I mean, I thought it was suggesting that perhaps he's either being drawn into whatever it is, the other dimension, or he wants to he wants to see if he can get in there to save
Yeah.
whoever she likes. And I'm like, okay,
There was something about like the dream. Everyone has the same dream.
yes, that was actually a cool concept
Yeah.
because at the end there's this dream and this like really weird kind of glitchy image that you see several times throughout the film, and then at the end it turns out to be the woman who went. I thought that was kind of cool because
Yeah.
it's like it's almost like a transmission from the future, right?
There is cool ideas sprinkled
Exactly.
throughout, but it really never comes together,
No.
in my opinion.
And I think that's for me, that's the biggest issue, is that you've got all these disparate ideas, but there's no through line to say, okay, well, this is connected. Like even in a movie where the vocabulary the jargon is over my head, if the story's good enough, you can see what they're doing. You don't have to understand every term.
Yeah.
But in this one, there's no through line. There's just nothing to connect.
I mean, they're antithetical to each other, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no quantum physics and Catholicism, whatever, there's no way those are going to actually connect. So whatever you're saying is just kind of made up, I would think. Like,
Yeah.
to me, it just there was nothing there to discover. It was just a neat idea for just window dressing, but
Exactly.
I don't know.
And I mean, yeah, like some of the sets were cool. Like I like the interior of the church. I mean, it did dawn on me. It's like, oh, who's lighting all
That's
the
a
candles?
lot of candles.
And again, I mean, the other thing too that I thought was a little bit over the top was they've got a U-Haul truck full of equipment that they happen to set up like in an hour. And they've got all these machines from the university or whatever. It's like, really? You've got however many people, like a dozen people, and oh, you forgot the machine that goes bing. But I don't know. there are just too many things that were too hard to believe for me.
So if you're like listening to this right now and be like, you guys are idiots, like this movie's amazing, and you're basing that on your nostalgia that you watched this 20 or 30 years ago, it might be worth going back and rewatching just to see if you still think it holds up. Because I think a lot of these films, nostalgia is what carries your
100%.
idea for it. And sometimes when you go back and rewatch it, you're like, oh, that wasn't as good as I remember being when I was 8.
If I had to rate it before I saw it, the nostalgia effect would have been heavy for me.
Yeah.
Because I like Carpenter and I'm like, oh yeah, that was good, or whatever.
But that Walter guy, when he's in the room screaming and they're trying to like break the wall down, she has like a ruler. She's kind of like chipping away this, like, come on. Like you think you'd get like a giant heavy object or something, try to break the wall.
And for two women who are supposedly possessed by the devil or, whatever it is, yeah, they're not making a lot of effort. I mean, the walls are kind of like lath and plaster, and it's like they're, oh, I can't get through the wall.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I mean, some of those things were not believable for me too. It's like, I'm pretty sure if she grabbed a guy who was a foot taller than her and broke his neck, she could get through that wall a little faster.
Yeah.
So, there's those elements of Carpenter asking us to suspend our disbelief for some of those things. It was a tall order, I think.
Yep. Well, it was 3 million budget, but it made 14 million, so it did well at the time. Well enough. It's good for him.
And I think again, if you look at it from, and I think we'll talk about this probably a lot this season, when you look at it from the lens of the 1980s and what was going on and the other kinds of movies that are being made, it's understandable to me that it would have an impact, right? It's kind of like A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was right around this time, like was it 86, 85, something like that. That one I remember renting and it blew me away.
And that one holds up.
Yeah.
Because I've watched it recently and I quite liked it. Yeah.
So I think, again, it's a simple premise in that one. It's like, okay, there's a guy who kills you in your sleep.
Yeah. This one is not simple.
No, I mean, and I think that's the problem with this film. It trips over itself trying to resolve all of these high ideas that are cool concepts on their own, but they don't work together.
Yeah, and if you had really well-written, charismatic actors, I think that could carry it too. Like there's enough mood and atmosphere here that I could forgive some of those little things.
Yeah.
But all the characters are pretty lame and forgettable, I felt like, for the most part too. So I will, though, go watch In the Mouth of Madness. I'm curious to see that just to finish the trilogy at this point.
I'd be curious.
And I like Lovecraft stuff, so
I'd be curious to know if you have a similar feeling to me. Like I would rate these The Thing, Madness, and then this one, Prince. Yeah. So I'd be curious to know whether you think In the Mouth of Madness holds up better. And again, I feel it does because it's a simpler concept.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too bad to kick off our 80s season with a dud, but
I know. I knew I had a Roger Ebert. I just saw my note on Roger Ebert. So this is he called it oppressive, the synth score.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I found it annoying, but Roger Ebert called it oppressive.
In a good way or a bad way?
No, in a bad way.
Oh, okay.
It was one of the detractors,
Right.
In his. Now again,
See, for me, I put that down as one of the only good things I liked about it. So that's funny.
You know, and music can do a lot for a film. I mean, so for example, if you look at another Carpenter film in Halloween, the theme is there, and it's often just above, you know, background noise. But I find that more haunting.
Oh yeah.
Because he's got a knack for that drone-like repetitive. But for
or the
me,
thing do the boom boom.
yeah. But it just
Boom,
worked for me. It worked better in Halloween because it's more subtle, and I think also because Halloween, it's a piano, or at least it's a digital piano.
Yeah.
It's not a synthesizer.
Yeah.
So,
it's one of the best film themes ever. Yeah.
And I mean, I think I've probably mentioned this to you. Did you know that John Carpenter, it's funny, wrote the theme for Shudder?
Oh, yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's like,
Boom, boom. Yeah.
Very similar. He might have even just, I've got this leftover tape from 1979. You can use.
I didn't realize that, but it's very evocative of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, I think anything else to say about Prince of Darkness,
I don't
1987?
know. We've crapped on the characters and and the story and some of the concepts. I don't have any more negative to say.
Nope. Nor positive. I think I'm good.
Nor positive. No, exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll bring some more 80s goodness next episode, and we'll see you in the aisles.